Okay, so we're back recording now, and we've had a request to interpose Casey Bellamy and Damon, who's a witness, just to present. So over to you, Casey, and welcome, Damon.
Ka pai. O mihi ana kia koutou e te whānau. My name is Damon Ritai, Ngāti Te Whiti descendant, and current deputy chair of Te Kotahitanga o Te Atiawa. My purpose for being here is to speak to the kōrero that Casey has raised in the submission in her report. And I think from my point of view that the area or the number that I want to look at, or the kaupapa I want to look at and talk to, is number 17. If you've had a look at the report, which speaks to the view shafts. So it's 15, 16, and 17. Yes. These are the view shafts from significant tangata whenua sites, and in particular our pā sites here within Ngāmotu. So just for a bit of background, Ngāmotu has over 75 different pā sites here in New Plymouth. Those pā sites, of course, have been over time affected by the development of New Plymouth City. From a cultural perspective, my view is always that if I'm on an old pā site, the thing that I look for are other significant sites around me. And the pā sites that have been discussed and talked about is one significant here for us, our hapu of Ngāti Te Whiti, which is Pukaka, being Marsden Hill. Pukaka also has 15 metres of soil that's missing from that pā site that was excavated and taken away in the 1880s. So when I go to a pā site or an old pā site, the thing that I look for are other significant sites around me. The first thing is the maunga. I always look for the maunga if I'm on a pā site. And the other thing I look for are what other pā sites can I see that are around me, and those view shafts are very, very important. So I look to other pā that are significant to us here in Ngāti Te Whiti. Pukaka, because it's missing the 15 metres of soil that used to be there. I can see, when I position myself, I can see different pā sites that are significant to me, and also things like our Paritutu Rock. Paritutu Rock is one of the very first things that I look for. That kind of positions me along with the Maunga Taranaki. I also listen for the rivers that are around me, and on Pukaka, of course, we have the Huatuki, which on the back side of course, where New Plymouth District Council is. The other view shafts that I look for that are significant is Maungaroa, Te Maungaroa or Blagden Hill, because Te Maungaroa is one of the higher pā site that we can see. Also around me, I look for the moana, our Te Tai o Rehua, Tasman Sea, and of course the Sugarloaves or Ngā Motu, the islands, where Paritutu positions me. So view shafts are to our pā sites, particularly those that now don't exist anymore because of Pukeariki is a classic example, where the soil from that pā site was used for reclaimed land, which now creates the foreshore that we walk on here at Ngā Motu. But that site itself was also another prominent site that that we could see. And when I give narrative background and stories and share those with visitors, like Commissioner Daish, when we visited Pukeariki, I always look to Pukaka, and the way that I show people where Pukaka is because of the biggest Norfolk pine that stands there, and I always direct my audience towards that Norfolk pine, because where that Norfolk pine is where Pukaka Pā site is. So I mean, those are just some of the examples of the importance of having view shafts, and I guess it's the ability to understand where and know that when you are at a pā site that you can position yourself to various other pā site that are around you. So I mean, one of the things that would be key for us is that on our pā sites, that people understand that if you look towards this way, you will see such and such pā site, or another pā site over this way, so that people understand that when we are on a pā site, a significant pā site, that we can see others from there as well. That's number one. That's the view shafts. So are there any questions or pārtai before I move into my next kaupapa?
Look, I have an obvious one. The 15 metres of soil taken off the top of the pā site there. How did that come about? Was that?
So that was in the time of the Taranaki land wars that started on the 17th of March 1860. During that time, the soldiers had moved into St Mary's and had built stockades around New Plymouth Township at the time. And during that time, the soldiers started to remove the soil between, must have been at least 1863 or even from 1860 onwards. And I've seen an old picture that shows soldiers digging soil into an old how would you call it, a coal mining bin on a railway track, and they would load it up. They would shift the soil along the railway track, disperse of the soil and bring it back. And before long, they had flattened out all of Pukaka to build the barracks for the soldiers.
Of course, yes.
So it was known as the barracks. So the barracks sat right behind St Mary's Church.
Okay.
So that was the purpose for removing the soil. That Pukaka Pā site was quite prominent because of the height and the view that you had down south or northern the coastal lines. So
yes, thank you, Damon. Look, one other comment, and I've mentioned this before, that kōrero gave me when I was looking at the building that was impinging on the view sites. Charles, I wonder whether you could just turn off the other. I think Tui might have the video on.
Oh, it's Tui.
Yeah. Okay. That session that you gave me, looking in Pukeariki and looking around the different maunga and that explanation. I mentioned to Sarah before, and I think to the council, that I'm very keen for all the commissioners through this hearing process to have the benefit of that, because I learned so much from that presentation. So that's a bit of an aside for today, and I'd just like to acknowledge your knowledge there, and I think that would add a lot of value just to the particularly around New Plymouth City itself, the main town, and also how you relate to these places. So look, that's me for the moment. David nodded his head that he didn't have any questions. I wonder, Antoine?
Just a clarification, Ilhua. You mentioned number 15, 16 and 17 at the start. What were you mentioning there?
Oh, that was the report written by Casey.
Oh, yes.
That talks to the view shafts, the views.
Oh, okay.
And from view shafts.
Oh, paragraphs 15, 16, 17.
Sorry, yes, I was. Yeah, paragraph.
Thank you.
15, 16,
Cool.
17.
I just want to make sure we're talking about the same numbers.
Yeah.
Up by
yeah.
dinner. Thank
Yes,
you.
Just want to acknowledge Casey, of course, for the great work that she did there in pulling the report together. If we don't have any questions on the view shafts, I've just got a couple of other things that I wanted to mention. The next thing was around entrance corridors into Ngā Motu, into New Plymouth City. We have a rich cultural history here in Taranaki. And if you were a visitor coming into New Plymouth, there really isn't a lot that speaks to the our Te Atiawa cultural expression. The cultural expression that tells you that you have arrived into the boundary of Te Atiawa iwi, and you know the significance of the boundary lines that we have as you enter into our city from of course the north, the south, and the east. And so I think for us there's some, well, in terms of this corridor, we just want to raise that there is an opportunity there to really look at and explore how we might be able to work alongside Hapu and the iwi to develop our entrance corridors into Ngā Motu, I think more collaboratively. Our New Plymouth Airport is a great example of you arriving to Ngā Motu, but also to Te Atiawa, with the narrative that speaks to the formation or the origins, the creation of Te Atiawa iwi. So our applied cultural expression in those areas is really something that I wanted to just raise with the council. And of course, the markers that we have in our landscape and the connection to our whenua, for that speaks to the past, but also to the present and the future. And of course, for us, that's around maintaining the integrity of our narratives that sit here within Te Atiawa Taranaki. And there's also that the other thing that sits there too is that we, in the times of Parihaka, where our people used to travel every month on the 18th and 19th of every month, our people would travel from all over the country to go to Parihaka and attend the Rā Days. The Rā Day was a day where Parihaka could discuss the issues and challenges of the times and to look at solutions moving forward. Our people would travel from as far north as, oh gosh, all over the country. I know stories of whānau that would travel from Dunedin on a ship, on a boat to arrive here 2 weeks and then head home 2 weeks and then have to come back again almost. But we had some significant, tracks through from around Taranaki. The Whakaahurangi track is one that was a prominent track that we used for our people to travel towards the east and down towards the south. We have a track that used to come from Waipapa, just north of Waitara, and our people of Ngāti Rāhiri that would travel from the north to Kātere ki te Moana, which is another significant past site and current marae of our Ngāti Tāwhiri Kura Hapu, and they would all meet at different places to travel to Parihaka. So to have those walking tracks identified and to be a significant part of our corridor, of our cultural expression, is another kaupapa that I'd like to discuss and to to talk to the council about. So I think I might have covered everything there in regards to that. And just in response to Commissioner Dacia's request, I would be happy for the council to go on the hikoi that we had at Pukeariki Museum to give more of a kānohi ki te kānohi expression of our rich natural narrative that we have here in Te Atiawa Taranaki. So with that, mihi ana ki a koutou. Thank you for your time. I know we've gone over time, and you've got other speakers as well, but mihi ana ki a koutou. And again, just to thank you to Casey for the work that she put into the report, along with our tai ao workers, Sarah Mako, Sean as well, Zelchers, on behalf of Te Atiawa, Te Kotahitanga o Te Atiawa. So, e mihi ana tēnei ki a koutou. Thank you very much. If you have questions, kei a koutou.
Thank you very much, Damon. Kia ora for that. Just around the timing of, it would be really appropriate when we're discussing the SESMS chapter, to maybe have that overview of the whole district with reference to the tipuna and the ancestors and the mountains and the places that you gave me at Pukeariki. I think that would be quite a good starting place for those hearings.
Great.
Okay. Look, I don't have any other questions. David?
Yeah, just a couple from me, Stephen. Good afternoon.
Kia
The first question I've got is you talk about exploring the opportunity how to develop entrance corridors into Ngāti Mutu, and how to promote this cultural expression, and talked about maintaining the integrity of the narrative. So these are the sort of phrases I've recorded. I'm just wondering, there's two ways of doing that, and they're not mutually exclusive. One is through controlling structures and development adjacent to the entrance corridors, and that's what the district plan does. The other is through a promotion of works, and I think Mr. Matheson might have referred to this, through artwork, structures, vegetation within the road reserve. And I just wondered, in terms of that second type of implementation of the corridors, is that something that that you would support in addition to controls in the district plan?
Yes, definitely. I know currently through Te Waka Kotahi, there's already some discussions and work that's happening around the instalment of the roundabouts along State Highway 3 going north from New Plymouth,
yes,
through to Waitara. And there are some discussions around what that might look like in terms of the cultural or expression in those areas through artwork and through landscape. So that's a definite kaupapa that I would support moving forward. So I think that's a really good one. Yeah. We have rongoa as well. Our planting or our plants that are very significant for us here in Taranaki. Whakairo in terms of carving, pou. So yeah, I think the expression of artwork through those corridors would be something that I know that a lot of our whānau would support.
Yes. Do you think, and I'm conscious of time, so I'll keep this short, do you think that's a more effective and more positive expression of the narrative than, say, controlling a dwelling that's within 3 meters or 5 meters of the highway?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, from examples that I've seen around other places that stand out, if you don't, if you're looking, you can see that there's a kaupapa or there's a carving, so there must be a narrative or there must be a story. It's something that triggers in my mind, oh, this is a place of significance.
Yes.
So I think that's really important.
Yeah, I can understand and relate to that. My final question is about view shafts. And the suggestion from Casey has been that that the provision be altered to refer to not just controlling the height of structures, but also controlling the height of trees within the view shafts. So that's an attempt to control a natural element in the environment. And I'll have some questions for Casey on that, but I just wondered why attempt to control a natural element in the environment as opposed to a man-made structure?
Yeah, I guess, I suppose when I think about that, I think about the Pukaka Pā site. The Pukaka Pā site has a whole lot of Norfolk pine there. If I go up onto the Pā site, I can see, well, if I'm looking towards certain places, I can't see them through those trees.
Yes.
So I have to position myself somewhere else that's not on the Pā site to be able to see, oh yeah, there goes Paritutu, there goes Papa Fiddle, etc. So that becomes a bit of an issue if I'm on the Pā site itself.
Okay.
So so that's my I guess my only response to that too. So
okay. Well, I'll take that up with Casey because there might be some practicalities about how that rule or how that provision might actually work in reality. But thank you for your time. Appreciate that.
Bye. Kia ora.
Antoine?
Yeah, tēnā koe, Damon. It was just further on from where Commissioner McMahon was going in terms of the entrance corridors, and it seemed to me what you were describing in terms of some of the places that would be good opportunities to explore cultural expressions, whether it be rongoa, waharoa, pouwhakairo, and those types of things. The place of those is really important. It isn't necessarily about anywhere along the corridor. The place has got to be related to the artwork, and the artwork's got to be have a relationship to the place. And I just wondered whether it might be that it's coincidental that entrance corridors would provide an opportunity, but in of themselves isn't necessarily the case.
No, tautoko that. The place of significance, and I guess I'm thinking about where boundary lines might occur between Te Atiawa iwi and Taranaki iwi, but that any driver who's driving past will know, oh, I've just come from Taranaki iwi and I'm now moving into Te Atiawa iwi, and I'm crossing past a pou to describe that.
Well, there might be more than one pou.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And then there's discussions about, well, where is the boundary line?
Exactly.
So, you know, those are discussions. But I think that the key element is that that we have that opportunity to be able to share that. And I think at the moment we only have here in Ngāmotu Te Pou Tūtaki, Fitzroy's pole, that's on the corner of just past the Waiwakaiho Bridge River, heading north, which is the only probably significant pou that we have, that when people see it, they not sure what's the narrative. Why is that pou there? So, you know, I think the more that we're able to express our kōrero and our narrative, the more we can lift the understanding of our community and our people. So,
yeah, thank you very much for that.
Kia ora, mihi ana.
Yes, thank you, Damon. I think you need to head away soon. So
thank you. Yes,
and all the best the rest of your day, and thank you very much for coming on. Casey, I'm just thinking we've interposed Damon. I think we might just finish off with Bal and Michael on the Kaingaroa team, and then come back to you and Maria. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, that's fine.
You know, see Te Puihi there. So tēnā koe to you. We'd just like to welcome everyone in when you join. If you might be not be listening. Anyway, back to you, Mel and Michael. Thanks for that, for letting us do that. That's been very much appreciated.
No problem. We've got to be flexible with these things. So what I'll do is I'll ask Michael to briefly speak. I've also emailed to Charles the next notes,
Right.
and a brief response to the part 2 MPSUD, which I'll speak to at the end briefly, but you've got that in writing as well already.
Great,
And
thank
then
you.
in case you need it for any questions of Michael, he's just passed on, which I've forwarded on to Charles, the fact sheet for the Intensification Act, if we can call it that, bill, which Commissioner McMahon has no doubt read, but may have some questions about. So you'll have that as well in case you need it.
Great, thank you very much.
Over to you, Michael.
Kia ora, Commissioners. Good afternoon. I'll just review my summary, and I've got a couple of other comments to add, then happy to take questions. So obviously I'm here presenting evidence on behalf of Kāinga Ora in relation to the view shafts and the entrance corridors. By way of summary, and obviously my evidence is in line with the evidence that you've heard from Mr. Ray. So I'm not going to dwell too much on that and happy to answer questions, but in summary, I recommend deletion of the view shafts identified as Belt Road and Victoria Road. I recommend the partial deletion of the view shafts identified as Gover Street and Cutfield Road, apart from the northern end of Gover Street and Cutfield Road, where a height restriction should apply over privately owned land with development potential to maintain a view over these sites to the sea. I recommend retaining the view shafts identified as Brougham Street, Egmont Street, Molesworth Street, Queen Street, Messenger Terrace, Leodette Street, Airport Drive, Dixon Street, Racecourse, Papawhero, Mount Motoroa, and Te Rewarewa Bridge. I recommend retaining Churchill Heights, Pukaka, Marsland Hill, and Cameron Street, but with modifications as set out in the evidence of Mr. Nick Ray. And I recommend providing greater accuracy in relation to the retained view shafts, providing a surveyed point of origin coordinates for sides of the view shaft, surveyed height of view shaft floor. In that respect, in terms of, I think, the question around how that would fit, I'd anticipated, and you recall that Mr. Ray sort of brought up the example of Auckland of the identification of the coordinates and points for each view shaft, and I kind of envisaged that those would slot into the various view shafts that are identified in the rules within the plan, but happy to talk to that further. I have recommended some wording changes to the objective and policies as set out in attachment A of my evidence, and those were in discussions with Mr. Ray. And then finally, turning to the recommended entrance corridor, I recommend deleting the western and southern entrance corridors for New Plymouth, where they front the residential, mixed use and commercial zones, and the residential zone component of the eastern corridor. Happy to answer questions, but I did have a couple of comments that if you'd like me to respond to them now in relation to city zone and the submissions by Kāinga Ora, if you'd like me to just run through those.
Michael, if I can just, I don't know if other people are getting this, but I'm getting slightly patchy audio. Is anyone else getting that, or is it just me? Might just be me.
I'm getting it also. It reminds me of that
Okay.
chorus ad on TV.
Okay. Michael, maybe turn your video off just while you're speaking quickly, and if that's going to help, or
Okay.
unless you can tell your kids to stop playing Fortnite or something.
I don't think they're on, but how much of people not hear? Sorry.
You froze. We got most of it, Michael. So you had a couple of matters you thought would be good to just take us through before we ask questions, and I'm very happy with that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I was just going to just run through in response to Commissioner McMahon's queries around the proposed medium density residential standards. As Mr. Matheson said, we've circulated the fact sheet, but just by way of a summary, the directions in that seek to enable height up to 11 metres in height with an additional 1 metre for a pitched roof. There's a height in relation to boundary control, which is a 6 metre vertical and then a 60% recession angle. And then there are setbacks which apply as a 2.5 metre front yard setback and 1 metre side and rear boundaries. And then there's a building coverage control of 50% and an impervious of 60%. And then outdoor living is 15 square metres for dwellings on the ground floor. That's all set out in the fact sheet, which we've forwarded. In terms of Kāinga Ora's submission in relation to the medium density residential zone, we've lodged a submission seeking to provide a height of 11 metres plus 1 metre, so not too well, pretty much the same as the fact sheet. Site coverage is 60%. I think that includes building coverage and impervious. Then the height in relation to boundary, we've proposed what we call an alternative height to boundary, which isn't dissimilar to the height in relation to boundary. It's probably slightly more conservative than what is proposed in the fact sheet. And then in terms of setbacks, the submission seeks a 1.5 metre setback from the road frontage and a 1 metre side yard setback, and then outdoor living spaces of 20 square metres for the ground floor. It's kind of a quick summary of the comparison between the two. And then I thought it was just to mention, just so that you had in your mind, in terms of Kāinga Ora's other submissions around height, Kāinga Ora's lodged a submission in relation to the mixed use zone, and obviously you'll be aware that the mixed use zone surrounds the city centre. That's the kind of pinky red area, and the current proposed plan has a height of 10 metres proposed in that zone, the mixed use zone, and Kāinga Ora have lodged a submission seeking that 16 metre height plus a 1.5 metre roof form is provided for in the mixed use zone. And then in terms of the city centre zone, the reporting planner took you through that there were sort of 4 sub areas ranging from 10 metres in the A, 14 metres in area B, 17 metres in area C, and 22 metres in area D. And in relation to Kāinga Ora's submission, it's seeking to apply 10 metres in area A, which is the same as the operative plan, 19 metres in area B, which is an increase of 5 metres, 25 metres in area C, which is an increase of 8 metres, and 30 metres in area D, which is an increase of 30 metres, appreciating that those matters have to be considered. But they, Mr. Ray can confirm, but they form the basis of him assessing the effects in terms of the view shafts, in terms of Kāinga Ora's submission. That's probably it. The only other point I'd make in relation to the volcanic cones, and Mr. Ray did sort of bring up the Auckland example, and Commissioner Coffin's obviously familiar with that, but I thought it'd be interesting to note that just supplementary to that is in terms of how those rules work, is they kind of work quite independently of the zone height. And so in relation to the view shafts and the contours that are provided, you can have situations where the view shaft, the volcanic view shaft, actually sits below the permitted height and actually act as a further constraint to that particular area. An example is actually, for example, Newmarket, which is a reasonably large metropolitan centre, which the normal zone provisions actually enable a height of 72 metres, but the volcanic cone view overlay actually reduces that quite dramatically in many parts of that particular area. And likewise, there are other areas where the zone height is actually below the view plane for a range of reasons that, you know, the view plane it's well clear of, I guess, the actual zone height. So I just thought it might be helpful to clarify how that particular rule is applied in that instance. And that's enough from me, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Michael. You're certainly loud and clear. Just put your video back on because it's easier for us.
Sure.
We'll see how we go. Yeah. All right, Commissioner McMahon.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. Mr. Campbell, I'm not going to ask you any questions on particular view shafts, and the reason for that is, I guess you're relying on the evidence of Mr. Ray.
Correct, yes.
Yes, and as I said earlier, there's some contestability between the evidence of Mr. Ray and Mr. Bain, and there might be a process for attempting to resolve that. So that really just leaves the provisions themselves. And I just wanted to work through your attachment A. I think I've got the right attachment this time.
Yep.
And I've got also the Officers Appendix 1 in front of me also. So the first provision I come to is the actual objective itself. And the key changes there are views versus view shafts, and the addition of the words from identified locations.
Correct.
Yes. And the original wording was view shafts from public places, right at the front. I just wondered, why is the term public places not fit for purpose in that sense?
Well, I acknowledge, as far as I'm aware, all of the views come from public places. I mean, that's a change that's been recommended by the council.
Yes.
I can't think of a situation off the top of my head where you'd have that situation where you've got a view from a private place. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So, so you're saying the key point is that they're identified locations, which just happen to be public places.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's right.
Thank you. In terms of planning practice, that sort of objective, does it find currency in the Auckland unitary plan?
Yep, I think it's very simple. There's a lot of similarities to some of the objectives, particularly around the volcanic cone.
Yes.
Yeah,
I must admit, I'm not familiar with the unitary plan at all. I'm very familiar with the Wellington City Plan, who Sarah Edwards, team leader for New Plymouth, will be familiar with too, because she hails from that part of the Motu, and that has a handful of view shafts which are based on photo montages essentially, but doesn't necessarily have the same detail that the Auckland and Tauranga ones do. There's not a question there, Mr. Campbell. Just I'm sharing with you my inexperience with the Auckland scenario. The other question I had was policy 2, and you've sought to extend that by differentiating between views to significant landmarks versus views to, I guess, other parts of the resource. And the difference is, I guess, the degree of protection or management that's applied to each of those. Can you just take us through the rationale for that?
Yes.
And sorry, in doing so, I mean, well, I should acknowledge that policy 2 as notified was a very short policy.
Yes.
And it just talked about maintaining the visibility of view shafts by controlling the height of structures within view shafts. The simplicity is quite compelling. And I just wondered why you saw the need at the policy to differentiate 1 and 2, and to what extent that would be then followed through in the rule framework.
Sure. I think what I was in my discussions with Mr. Ray, when we went through his analysis in relation to the views, we kind of came to the view collectively that there were some views that we felt were more significant and had a greater priority or hierarchy than perhaps other views. So, and Mr. Ray touched on this in terms of those views of Mount Taranaki and the views of the islands. And so when we talked it through, we felt that it might be beneficial to kind of differentiate between those more significant views as opposed to the views perhaps of the water, which probably have more capacity to take additional built form within their view. And so I was trying to mediate between those two. And I guess in terms of the implementation, the rules generally referred, in terms of assessment, they refer to policy 2, but I mean, it may be suitable if you felt that wording was acceptable to also have a reference to policy P2 as well.
Yes, so I think you said Yeah, they refer to policy 3 currently.
P3, sorry, yes, correct.
Yes.
And I just, if you felt that recognition of that hierarchy was appropriate, then perhaps you could cross-reference that policy as well.
Yes, because without that nuancing in the matters of discretion, you wouldn't get the ability to nuance between the different sites, would you?
I think that's fair. That's a fair comment. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, the only other way would be to prioritise or rank the 19 sites, or how many there are, into 2 sets with the significant and the rest.
Yes.
And maybe to have different activity status or different matters of discretion.
Potentially, but I think P3 does provide a pretty comprehensive suite of matters for having regard to, and obviously, each view shaft will have its own particular unique characteristics and outcomes.
Yes.
I just felt in my discussions with Nick that just that flagging the point that there is a little bit of a hierarchy there was beneficial.
Yes. Yes, in fact, P3 would apply to all sites, wouldn't it?
Yes.
And P2 would help determine the significance of sites in the overall realm of the assessment.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. And then my final question is the one that I put to Damon earlier about entrance corridors and view shafts, particularly the imposition of the proposed addition of trees into the provision that would control, in addition to structures, trees and view shafts. Do you have any comment on that at all?
Yeah, I guess from an implementation point of view, I think that opens up a real issue in terms of compliance with the provisions and ongoing monitoring and administration. I think it's a bit of a can of worms, and the issue raised I have sympathy with, but maybe and I'd have to look at the detail, but maybe some of those issues aren't necessarily the fact of the RMA restricting views. Maybe it's an issue of what's occurring on the actual open space, and there's a mechanism of engagement with the council around making sure that those views are maintained or even, if possible, enhanced. I can say, and it's possibly not exactly correlated, but there has been a process ongoing in Auckland, in the Maunga, around changing some of the landscaping outcomes that are occurring on the Maunga, and that's been a really, I think that's hitting a really positive outcome for Auckland. But yeah.
Okay. And again, I'm testing these examples with you, not to indicate a shortcoming at all, but just to get your feel, because I'll be testing this with Casey also. But the second change that's come from Casey's Appendix 1 is in relation to entrance corridors and an additional matter of discretion suggested that looks at the effects of, in this case, a reduced setback for a structure, and the effects of, let's say, a dwelling or a garage or a granny flat, looking at the adverse effects on tangata whenua's relationship with their culture and traditions, ancestral lands, water sites, wahi tapu and other toonga, and their association with the area. This question is not to belittle that ideal, but I'm wanting to understand how realistic is that in terms of a reporting officer reporting on a reduction in setback of 1 metre from a garage fronting the road.
Yeah, once again, I mean, I think it does raise issues around how you actually assess it, both from the point of view of an applicant or someone trying to actually design or do something, and then from the point of view of assessment, particularly I think in relation to this urban context. From my perspective, if I put my hat on as maybe an applicant, it would present some issues. I mean, I wouldn't profess to be an expert in those areas, so we would in a situation like that, we would defer to seeking input from mana whenua on that issue. And I guess you sort of ask yourself, well, in relation to the issue, is that addressing the particular issue?
Okay. Thank you. And just finally, just interested in what experience you've had with entrance corridor provisions in your profession throughout the country. Have you had much experience with that at all?
No, I haven't, to be perfectly honest. And I think it's probably acknowledged by Ms Andrews that that they're not a particularly common area. I should say, I mean, I do have
Gibson, Miss Gibson, Miss Gibson,
sorry?
Miss Gibson.
Oh, Miss Gibson, sorry. Yep,
Yes.
I do have some. I have support for the approach of entrance corridors as you come into the city. I mean, I can think of a number of examples as you drive into some of New Zealand's urban towns, particularly in the rural, as you're approaching the urban area, and you've had farm buildings or industrial type buildings at the edge of the city, which have resulted in some pretty poor outcomes in terms of the entry of a city. So I have a lot of sympathy with that approach, and one of the reasons in my evidence why I suggested that the eastern area should still have some controls in relation to some of the business zones is, in my visit to that area, I think there are been some regrettable outcomes, particularly I think around the, I think I've made a note of it, Constance Street and Burton Street, in that area where there's a bit of mixed use. And I think because of the roads, the development there has turned its back on the adjoining road and presented some pretty harsh interfaces with that environment. So that was my rationale for why I think it was appropriate there. But in respect to the other areas, I think my view, which is set out in my evidence, is that the underlying zoning can provide those amenity outcomes.
Okay, so thank you for reminding of that. Your advice to Kaingaroa is to resolve from the eastern entrance opposition to.
Well,
but you maintain the western and southern entrance corridor opposition.
Correct, and the eastern entrance is just in relation to the residential, where it is in the residential.
Okay.
But I support the corridor as it applies to the rural and industrial parts of the site. I think there's good merit.
And just finally, you would have heard my discussion with Ms Macbeth and Ms Gibson regarding the purpose of the setback and how that land would be utilised, and in particular how it would be landscaped or treated. I think in your evidence you've indicated that there's no compulsion to grow trees or shrubs unless it's for a screening function for an outdoor storage area. Otherwise, there is compliance with just grassing the setback strip.
That's right.
Yes. What about fencing? How does that fit into that? Would a fence on the boundary preclude the need for any grassing?
Well, as I understand it, and I'm open to different views, there's the ability to put a fence, depending on the road, of between 1.4 and 1.8 metres. Yes. So it kind of nullifies an outcome in terms of not only grass, but probably low shrubs as well.
Yes. Yes, that was my understanding, and I've particularly asked you that question intentionally because I'm very keen for Ms Gibson to consider your answer in light of the answer that she gave about the need to that the purpose of the rule is not only to is to enable landscaping to occur, but it's not there to enforce above ground landscaping to occur, and it only really requires grassing. And that grassing, the effect of that grassing or that green strip could be negated through a 1.8 metre fence on the boundary. And that's certainly not what the objective of the corridor is it?
No, that's not. I mean, I've taken the view that as you get into the urban area, the best outcome for the urban area is to ensure that buildings are celebrated and interact with the streetscape and
yes.
Present well.
Yes, and that's through some urban design controls, presumably. That may include, may not include setbacks, particularly quite often with interaction with buildings. You want the building to actually come up to the road boundary and be articulated in that sense through glazing and public access.
Yes, exactly, and I guess that speaks to the point around the city centre zone. And whilst Kāinga Ora has a slightly different view in terms of the future role of the mixed use zone, the Kāinga Ora's position is both of those environments really we want to encourage buildings to actually address the street and create activation and create sort of legibility to the street.
Yes, no, thank you for that. And look, I know you'll be listening, Ms. Gibson. It's certainly not an endeavour to undermine your answers, which I valued. I just wanted you to be given the opportunity to consider whether on its own the 3 metre setback without other rules other than grassing is actually effective in achieving the objective of the entrance corridors. I know you said you believe it is, but I just wonder, in light of the answers from Mr. Campbell, whether you might want to reconsider that. And if that's still your view, that's fine, but I'd just like you to have the opportunity in your right to reply to canvass Mr. Campbell's response. That was all from me, Mr. Campbell. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen.
Yes, over to you, Antoine.
Yeah, thank you. I just had one line of questioning. I think most of the other questions you've had have been answered now. This just relates, I'll just bring it up here, paragraph 3.6 of your evidence, and it's just the matter, and it sort of ties to the hierarchy that's been recommended by Mr. Ray, and I'm thinking about, particularly in the light of some of the iwi submissions and drawing our attention to section 6E, the relationship of Māori with the Tangawhenua with those Māori traditions, sites, areas of significance, etc., and also 6F, protection of heritage, and wondered whether you'd considered that in terms of your consideration of 6B vis-a-vis section 7, and there being perhaps a differentiation between those matters of national importance and those were less important.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I wasn't sure that it necessarily fell to be a 6B matter, but I think, and Mr. Ray and I, when we talked about these issues, we were cognizant that those particular views were of significance to tangata whenua. So I think that featured in part of our rationale for why we felt that they should be given a slightly higher recognition.
And just asking the question in a slightly different way, if I was to put to you, rather than there being a hierarchy of the different types of views or view shafts, as been described by Mr. Ray, that they were different types of views, not necessarily ones that are more important than the others. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I think it's probably fair they're different. They probably have different outcomes. I think the point I was making is the views of Mount Taranaki and the islands. I think they're probably more sensitive to changes, whereas some of the other views, I think they can absorb more building form. And obviously, some of those things need to be assessed on the basis of a particular application. But I guess that was kind of the view.
Thank you. That's really helpful. That's all the questions I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Last cab off the rank in terms of questions. Look, just wondered whether you've reflected on the merits and value of conferencing along the lines that Commissioner McMahon suggested might be thought about. And I've got, before you answer that, as an expert planner, particularly in terms of our role, we need to look at both sides of expert advice. Like Mr. Bain's pretty experienced in this town. And you know, lots of sort of lived experience. Mr. Ray brings, you know, different approach from his experience in Auckland and elsewhere. So just as and I'll also preface this on the fact that obviously you and Mr. Ray have spent a lot of time on this and thought about this quite deeply. And Kāinga Ora is working in a constructive way with these chapters to sort of look at how you might fashion them to meet objectives of Kāinga Ora and where the council's going. So yeah, just your view with that, with those introductions about the value of conferencing at this stage.
Yeah, I think Mr. Ray made the comment that the positions of Kāinga Ora to the council aren't hugely apart, and I agree with that, and I certainly would support conferencing, and I'm absolutely open to working with the council to see if we can collectively come to an approach that delivers both outcomes in terms of making good opportunities for maximising the development potential, but also recognising the views that have been identified. So yeah, more than happy. I think it's a good suggestion.
I asked you previously just think about implementing the implementation methods that Mr. Ray has suggested or recommended, and I presume those go into the detail of Schedule 5 and how everything's sort of included in there. We've got these recommendations and some plans and some modelling and those sort of things. There is a bit of work to do to transition those recommendations into the plan, and we'd certainly be interested in the council's team's feedback on this conferencing idea, but those are the sort of things that could be worked on.
Absolutely.
You need both planners and landscape architects and urban design advice in doing that.
Yes, and potentially, dare I say it, a little bit of GIS sort of data assistance and potentially, obviously, some, depending on where you go with it, some survey input as well.
Okay. Well, look, let's leave that there, because I do know that every time we suggest conferencing, it just had some more sort of workload there, already busy teams on both sides. So I'm a great fan of.
I should perhaps say, Mr. Commissioner, we have also suggested some meeting with the council to talk about the residential and mixed use zones. So we've reached out on that. We are keen to have a conversation with that as well.
Yes. Well, that's certainly encouraged, and I am quite a fan of the conferencing process when issues are not absolutely opposite, and there's sort of will on both sides. So I'll talk to the council planners about that, but I just wanted to establish your views on that one. Look, I do want to go to quite a specific matter, which you might be able to help me with. 3.11 of your evidence. This is talking about policy 6.
Yeah.
And I'm looking particularly at the way B is framed around I suppose it's the fact now that there will be significant changes in our urban environments given the MPUD, like MPSUD. There's a real change of planning approach. That you agree with that? Yes. And then B1 sort of has a bit of a dollar each way, that there might be some winners and losers. Is that the way you read that with values?
Yeah, it is. It's sort of, to make an egg, you've got to break a few omelets. Make an omelette, you've got to break a few eggs.
Yeah. And then item 2 there does intrigue me. It says, well, but those changes aren't of themselves an adverse effect. So again, that's sort of directing decision makers through a national policy statement to be quite focused on saying, well, those changes can't be considered an effect or an adverse effect in terms of decision making, how we look at 104 and those sort of decisions. So, and I think I've had a quick squiz at your supplementary evidence, Val, just around the relationship of the Act and interpreting them and amongst new national policy statements, which are looking to make significant changes. I think that's quite helpful, but it may be the same issue here, that we've been directed, if we're sitting on a resource consent application, significant changes they may be, but they're not in themselves an adverse effect. It's quite a broad direction, I suppose. And whether you had any thoughts about that?
We're just working with it. I mean, it's a brave new world. I mean, Mr. Matheson may have some comments, but yeah, I mean, we're probably grappling with it as much as you.
Yeah, no, it's not a criticism. It's just I'm really interested to get your opinion about that. And Val, whether you had any other thoughts?
Yes, I have. Thank you. So I might let Michael finish because there's a couple of points I want to finish off, including briefly commenting on that, if I may.
That's all good. All right. I just had one or two other things. And again, look, I just had a question about scope, which I think I know the answer to, but I'll put it to you anyway, Ms. Campbell. These changes that you're seeking and recommendations from Mr. Ray, I take it that your position would be as you've actually sought deletion of the view shafts and entrance corridors, that you've got pretty broad scope to meet somewhere in the middle or whatever that, and these changes that you're recommending are all within scope as you see it?
Yes, we believe they are. I mean, with the time, I guess Kaingaroa took a sort of a broader view because of when the plan came out, it didn't have the time to be able to do that detailed analysis. So it did ostensibly oppose it, but then as you've gleaned, we've come back and reviewed it and revised our position. I think there's scope there.
Yeah, that's good. And one last question of clarification. In your attachment A, the version I've got anyway printed out seems to have some text bolded and some not. And whether anyone else has seen that or just the way mine's been copied.
Mine, I don't think does, but there was, if there is, there was no intention with bolding.
That's a copier error by someone that's done this for me, so that's all good. And yeah, look, I've asked all the questions I need to, so thank you very much for your assistance.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Really just feedback to the Kaingaroa, we really do appreciate the level of thought and detail you put into this. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Campbell. So just a couple of finishing points, if I may, addressing the questions. So just over the lunch break, so there's a question around why is the qualifying matters exemption just apply to tier 1 and not tier 2 and tier 3? So the answer to that is the tier 1 directs at least 6 stories, which is not in tiers 2 and 3. So if you like, the balance for that is that there are a range of qualifying matters, given the heights of at least 6 stories could actually have reasonably significant effects on a wider range of matters. So in my view, that's how the NPS is structured. It has tier 1 with some very high intensity directed, but that's balanced by qualifying matters. That same 6 stories plus is not specified in tiers 2 and 3, so there's no need for the qualifying matters exemption in there. Okay. So just in terms of applying it, I think that's helpful. On the supplementary submissions that I just sent through, so just quickly talking to those, and your very experienced panel, you've seen this before, we've seen the movie, know the end. So this is a King Salmon situation. Insert NPS UD for NZCPS and insert New Plymouth District Plan for the regional plan, and that it was in that case the unitary regional plan. Plans have to be in accordance with the Part 2, but must give effect to the NPS. So that's the debate. How do you do something in accordance with Part 2 and give effect, and what happens if there's an alleged clash? In my submission, the amenity effects as it might restrict intensification is expressly and deliberately addressed in the NPS UD, and that's the objective 4 in policy 6B that Mr. Chair that you referred to.
Yep. So
out of all the matters in Part 2, the NPS UD has deliberately and intentionally separated out amenity and has dealt with it expressly in an objective and in a policy. And based on the Supreme Court's decision in New Zealand King Salmon, my submission to you is on that basis, it's not possible to rely on general section 7C matters and definition of amenity to undermine effectively the direction in the NPSUD. So it's not to say amenities are relevant, it's just that as far as amenity is concerned, it has to be given effect to within the context of the NPSUD, not the broader maintenance and enhancement of amenity in section 7, to the extent it relates to matters covered by the NPSUD, i.e. urban development. So if you're talking about amenity in a rural area, you know, of an open space area, obviously section 7C would still be relevant. To the extent it talks about amenity effects, and particularly where you have an amenity effect that's proposing to restrict an outcome otherwise anticipated by the NPSUD, i.e. intensive urban development, then my submission to you is that you can't rely on the broader section 7C to do that. You've got to rely on, look at the NPSUD application of amenity. That can be interestingly contrasted, for example, with section 6E matters. Because the NPSUD doesn't, quote, cover the field with respect to section 6E, it is possible to go back to section 6E and use broader matters under matters of national importance, to the extent, because although, having said that, Objective 5 of the NPSUD expressly refers to the principles of Tiriti, which will include active protection, which in my view would go wide enough to include, you know, important cultural views from Marae to, Sugarloaf, etc. So to the extent, I guess my submission is, to the extent that there's a suggestion that broader amenity can form a basis either for the entrance corridors or for view shafts across the town that would otherwise restrict the development enabled by the NPSUD, then you've got to apply the amenity in the NPSUD and what that means. So that was that point. I think it was on the conferencing, absolutely support that. I mean, I do appreciate that there is, just to give a practical example, I was asked to advise the other day on a development in Auckland. There was a view shaft over the site. We looked at one corner of the site that there was more height enabled because of the slope of the land, and we were able to design a building and put the high part of the building in the area where we had the most height. We're able to do that once off the plan. You could read the contours on the planning maps. You knew exactly how much height you had in which part of the site, and you designed the building, and you knew that it fell underneath the view shaft plane because you knew exactly what height relative to ground level the view shaft was at on every part of the site, which just from an effectiveness and certainty point of view was fundamentally clear to a developer, as opposed to doing a design, taking it to council. Council says, no, you've got to view it from 10 metres that way, not that way. You've got to rip up your montage and do it again. I mean, it'd be hopeless. So, I mean, this is an important issue, and I agree, it's mucky to sort of stop and have caucusing, but Kaingaroa thoroughly supports caucusing. We actually reached out to council and said, can we have a talk about it, in light of the fact that the timing was so tight, there wasn't time, but there is a view, there is a clear willingness to talk. I guess that ultimately that there is a difference in methodology or approach between Mr. Bain and Mr. Ray. And my only suggestion would be, to the extent at some point, if that difference is maintained, I guess that the panel is just going to need to make a call on which methodology it prefers. There is time between now and when you need to issue final decisions for that further work to be done. I think it's all within scope. The only area where, just based on Mr. Ray's presentation this morning, where I have to say to the panel that I think you would run into scope issues is if, for example, Mr. Ray was now proposing a view shaft that would impose a control over an area of land that wasn't previously controlled. And he said, look, there are some areas where, you might, impact. I think from a scope issue, that wouldn't be okay. You'd have to effectively stop the view shaft at the edge of the current level of control. But with that small caveat, and I don't think that would apply in many cases, there's absolutely scope to change the methodology, because the impact of it is clearly within scope, and how that's defined is obviously up to the panel as to what you feel is most appropriate. So we're very happy to talk, and we'll be available as we need to. And I mean, yes, it may delay things. We may need to reconvene. There may need to be a process around that, but it is important to get this right, because as you would have heard, it's a big issue for both sides, really.
Yes, and certainly we're pretty respectful of if these conferencing processes are sort of agreed and are going to add value, sort of giving extra time for the formal written feedback from the council team as well, because they're on a two-week deadline after the hearing finishes to wrap everything up. So that's another opportunity. So look, Val, thank you for your help, and certainly those further legal submissions are the quickest off the mark I've seen for quite a while. So the fact that we could read them just after lunch was good, and quite important legal points for us. So really appreciate that.
Right, thank you very much. I need to be excused. I have asked one or two people from Conroy to stay on. I need to dash, but okay. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. All right. I'm thinking, Casey, it would be good to work through your evidence now, and then maybe have a cup of tea, and we'll come back to Maria if that suits everyone.
So, tēnā koutou, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, and to those here today. To start, I'd like to thank Damon for his kōrero earlier, which provided context to the evidence I have prepared for the entrance corridors and view shaft chapters on behalf of Te Kotaitanga. There is one outstanding issue on the Te Kotaitanga submissions on the entrance corridors chapter. The issue relates to providing within the matters of discretion and the rules and effects standards for consideration of the effects on tangata whenua and their relationship with culture and traditions. The entrance corridors to New Plymouth are the tawhito, or traditional travel routes used by our tūpuna. With entrance corridors, when our present relationship with the land is with public roads and public places, there is an opportunity to achieve along the entrance corridors tangata whenua aspirations with regards to cultural expression, not only through artwork and planting within the corridor itself. Greater opportunities for cultural expression along the entrance corridors will serve to maintain and enhance the integrity of those corridors and assist to provide a pleasant arrival experience for visitors. In my view, the most appropriate location for the recommended amendment sought by Te Kotaitanga was an effects standard S1, which controls the minimum setback of structures to an entrance corridor. S1 includes, as a matter of discretion, the extent to which the external appearance, design and siting of the structure is in accordance with any relevant design guides. The design guides produced by the council have not benefited from tangata whenua input. In my view, the adverse effects of structures in proximity to entrance corridors can be mitigated through sensitive design, which reflects and embraces the narratives of tangata whenua and the relationship of tangata whenua with their culture and traditions. The recommended amendment will give effect to Objective 1, as it will serve to provide greater opportunities to support visually attractive, welcoming, pleasant visitor arrival experiences. The New Plymouth Airport is an example of the positive effects that can result from embracing tangata whenua narratives in the design of buildings and structures. The airport deepens the sense of place for tangata whenua whilst contributing to a rich, visually attractive and pleasant arrival experience for visitors. I think it would be a missed opportunity if the proposed district plan does not provide for the ability to reflect the relationship of tangata whenua in the design and external appearance of structures locating in proximity to entrance corridors. So for the view shafts chapter, there are two outstanding issues on the Te Kotaitanga submissions. The first is in relation to the importance of views to, from, and between view shafts of significance to tangata whenua. For example, views from Marae to the Maunga, to the sea, to other pā sites, and to awa. The second relates to controlling the height of trees, maintain view shafts of significance to tangata whenua. At paragraph 117 of the section 42A report, the author notes that given existing time and resource constraints, the proposed district plan cannot include view shafts of significance to tangata whenua at this point in time. And the report has highlighted some changes made to the overview and to objective 1 and policy 1 to better emphasise views of significance to tangata whenua. In my view, the provisions of the view shafts chapter can go further to better emphasise views of significance to tangata whenua. Tangata whenua submitters have raised concerns around the height of trees in view shafts. I have recommended changes to policy 2 and policy 3 to reflect these concerns. Although there is no associated rule at this point in time, the policy signals to plan users that the height of trees may be regulated in the future. Views to, from, and between view shafts of significance to tangata whenua are equally important. The views reaffirm the interconnectedness of the cultural landscape and recognise and provide for the relationship of tangata whenua and their culture and traditions with their ancestral lands, waters, sites, waihi tapu and other taonga. The author of the section 42 report has indicated that a variation or a future plan change will occur to incorporate view shafts of significance to tangata whenua. It is appreciated that the proposed district plan aims to provide clarity on an implementation issue with view shafts. Under the operative district plan, where there was confusion amongst plan users around whether the views applied to or from the identified view shafts, the proposed district plan clarifies that the views apply from the view shaft only. In my view, a change to the provisions to better emphasise that views apply to, from and between view shafts of significance to tangata whenua would better reflect that all of these elements are important to tangata whenua. Future view shafts of significance to tangata whenua will include several important elements, all of which will need to be included to ensure that the view shafts of significance to tangata whenua are adequately provided for in the plan. Possible view shafts may be from Marae to the Maunga, from Marae to the sea, to Tupuna Awa and to pā sites in the surrounding area, then also from those pā sites to the Marae, to the sea, to the Maunga, etc. If the recommended or proposed approach remains, where views only apply from the view shaft, it will be paramount that all important elements of view shafts of significance to tangata whenua are incorporated to meaningfully include those view shafts in the plan. And yeah, thank you. That's the conclusion of my summary of evidence.
Here we go. Casey, did you have that summary written up?
Yes, I can send that through.
Yes, send it through. Those summaries are actually quite handy just to provide an overview. Look, I'll start with Commissioner McMahon in terms of questions he might have.
I don't know if it's just my screen. Oh no, it's fine. Sorry about that. My screen was flickering. Thanks, Ms. Bellamy. I've actually, I guess I gave you a heads up as to the questions I was wanting to ask you when I was talking to Mr. Campbell. And so the two questions are about really the what appears in your Appendix 1 about the addition of the matter of discretion for entrance corridors and the addition to P2 for view shafts regarding trees. Just starting with the last one, trees. The officer, my reading of the officer's 42 report is they haven't recommended acceptance of that submission. And they've outlined some reasons why that is, particularly in relation to the degree into which there could be compliance with that rule and enforcement of that rule. Have you given, I mean, I can certainly understand from Damon's answer why you would want to control all obstructions to important views. But in this case, it appears that there might be some difficulty in effectively doing that in relation to trees. Have you given that any further thoughts since I posed that question to Damon and to Michael Campbell?
Yes, and I had considered it when I'd in my evidence as well. I appreciate that it is a potentially difficult matter to see whether it is complied with, but in Te Kotahitanga's submission. Yeah, in Te Kotahitanga's submission, we sought that, Te Kotahitanga sought that the provisions apply to new trees. And I think that addresses some of the concerns, like if it applied to existing trees, I mean, that could, bring in a lot of, compliance related issues. I think new trees, it could potentially relieve some of that.
I wasn't anticipating that it would apply to existing trees, but that's an interesting prospect. I guess what I was actually anticipating was that trees could be planted now and mature in 20-25 years time. At the time of planting, they don't necessarily infringe the view shaft rules, but at some point in time between being planted and becoming mature or semi-mature, they might, and I'm just not sure how the council would deal with that. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, so my only thoughts for how they would deal with that would be notifying properties that are within the view shaft, and then having a register of trees, I guess, people who plant trees after the date of notification, or
Okay. Well, let's see what the officers make of that answer. In terms of the entrance corridors, you make the important point that there's no new rule, but you're proposing to add a matter of discretion. And I just wonder how that would work in practice. I mean, these entrance corridors cut across residential, industrial, rural, mixed use zones. But I'm just wondering how a dwelling or a garage or a granny flat or some sort of structure that's built, 3 meters from the boundary of the road, or 2.5, as opposed to whatever the requirement is, 5 meters. What sort of opportunities there might be with that sort of application to actually exercise that matter of discretion, proposed discretion number 5 that you've outlined and read on Appendix 1, or is it simply a matter that matter of discretion is only relevant to the extent that it's relevant?
I think if I get what you're saying, I think it is only to the extent that it's relevant along the entrance corridor, because included is, as I've said in my evidence, references to the design guide, like the design, siting and external appearance of the building is in accordance with any relevant design guide that the council has produced. And that includes urban design elements predominantly. and these design guides haven't benefited from tangata whenua expertise. And so there is opportunities in the design and external appearance of buildings to reflect tangata whenua in that respect. And I think if the design guides benefited from tangata whenua expertise, they would already reflect those elements.
Okay, so the fact is they haven't benefited, and so as a substitute for that, that's the derivation of the new matter of discretion that you've suggested, is it? That's
Correct.
okay. And I'm going to have to ask you the question, Casey. I mean, how efficient is that to have applicants have to assess that on a whole range of minor structures that might infringe a front yard setback through a multitude of zones: residential, industrial, mixed use, rural? Is that an effective provision to give effect to the objective and policies?
I think it would be more efficient if the design guides had benefited from tangata whenua expertise, and so it was easily able for applicants to, without engaging or consulting with tangata whenua every time the rules are infringed. Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you on that one. Yeah. Okay. No, that's probably as far as I can take that. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Commissioner Coffin.
Good luck with Casey. It's good to see you up close. Last time we spoke, you were all fuzzy in the background, so it's good to see. This is the most in person I've seen you so far. So kia ora. I just had a few questions. You're going to have to excuse me. This is the issue of working at home. My daughter's just got home from school and she's waiting at the door. I'm just going to go and answer the door, if you don't mind.
I'll pick up there, Antoine. It's a funny old world we live in. It's you're back again.
Yeah, that's right. I'm multitasking. Here we go. Just one of the interesting parts of your submission is the to and from and in between, and I just wondered if you could just explain that a little bit more for me, because in my mind I'm thinking that particularly applies to what Damon has explained to us, and also it's been picked up by the landscape architects, is where there's places of significance to tangata whenua, could be described as SASMs, but also ONFLs, and we're thinking of Ngā Motu and some of the pā around New Plymouth. And it's important to recognise there's the view from one place to another, but equally from that place back. And I just wanted to get further understanding of if that's what you're thinking, or is it different?
That is my thinking around the view shafts too, from and between. Yeah, it is definitely important that all of the elements of the view form part of the view shaft. And in relation to pūkaka, like that was a really good example. And Mr. Bain had mentioned that particularly some of those panoramic view shafts, the intent was that it applied to and from. But yeah, I do appreciate that the approach in the proposed district plan has sought to address confusion matters and has specified that it's only from the view shaft. But it would be when a future plan change occurs to incorporate those view shafts of significance to tangata whenua, it would, if the provisions aren't changed to specify to, from and between view shafts of significance to tangata whenua, it would be important that all of the elements are incorporated to ensure that certain parts aren't missed.
Just to take that a little bit further, there's a number of the views or view shafts that have been identified in the notified version of the plan, plus an extra one, which don't have that aspect of a place of significance or two places of significance and the space in between them. They're a public place, like on a road, an intersection, and they're looking out to the sea. And do you consider those are a different category of views or view shafts, where the from, to, and in between wouldn't necessarily apply? It's really from a place looking out to the sea.
Yes, yes. So, and that's what a lot of the view shafts currently incorporate is along public roads, and they are, yeah, it is accepted that those are different to potentially the view shafts of significance to tangata whenua.
Well, thank you for that clarification. Just turning my mind to these the corridors, and you'll have to appreciate, certainly me, I'm not that familiar with this type of approach. I'm more used to gateway projects or particular places that manage the transition between the rural and the urban spaces, rather than linear long corridors. So this is an interesting and new concept for me, but it seemed to me that much of the focus is quite a finite space next to public roads, and it really relies on grass and trees. That's my blunt interpretation of it, and it doesn't necessarily extend to sensitive urban design or approaches beyond that. Is that your understanding, or do you have an expectation that it's much more than grass and trees? And
Yeah,
sorry,
no,
and some rules around outdoor storage and a few other buildings and structures as well.
Yeah, so what was the question again? Sorry.
It seems to me that the approach being used to manage development that might occur, certain types of development that might occur within the area of the entrance corridors, particularly in those on private land, is effectively a landscaping technique that's really using grass and trees, and in some instances some controls over outdoor storage and the like. Is that your understanding? Because what I was hearing from your submissions is that you're thinking there's going to be sensitive urban design techniques applied to these particular areas, but I don't read the notified plan rules as are currently crafted achieving that.
Yeah. So there's the landscaping and then control. Yeah, screening the outdoor storage through landscaping, but then when it comes to the minimum setback from the road boundary for buildings, as one of the matters of discretion where the permitted setback isn't met, it includes the extent to which the external appearance, design and siting is in accordance with the relevant design guide. And so the council has produced a number of design guides. I believe there's the residential design guide, the city and town centres design guide, and the subdivision design guides. But as I understand it, they are purely based on urban design principles rather than tangata whenua design elements.
Thank you for that. That might be just something we'll clarify with the section 42A authors, just to clarify that. I'll just check to see if I've got any other questions. That might be all from me at this stage. Just a question about the trees. I just wondered whether you had this is something that I've been involved in a number of projects in the past where we looked at view shafts from marae to landmarks, and trees were actually found to be one of the major impediments to those views, and they're often located on private lands. And do you know of any examples of where that's effectively been managed? It's something that I've certainly found in my professional career to be very difficult, where you have mature trees or even immature trees that grow up over a long period of time, managing or controlling those on private land.
I'm not familiar with any other plans, which control that. No. But I can definitely review and come back, and if I find any, I will let the panel know. Yeah.
Or maybe if it's at your fingertips, that might be helpful. But if it's going to require, significant research or exploring that, it's probably fine.
Yeah. Not that I'm aware of. No.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bellamy. I have one follow-up question. It's about this concept of to, from, and in between. Is that what was sought in the submission that you're talking to? I'm asking about scope, really.
In terms of our submission, yes, but I haven't actually sought any amendments to the
Yes.
provisions as such. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that was my question I was trying to lead into, that your evidence is that, and hearing Dame on, your evidence is that is what you'd like to see, but you haven't suggested any provisions. Is there a reason for that?
Well, I was struggling with the justification provided in the section 42A report, where it was a source of quite a lot of confusion and under the operative district plan. And so I was kind of thinking that view shafts of significance to tangata whenua could be incorporated under the current intended direction. However, it would be really important that all of the important elements of the view shaft were incorporated to ensure that the view shafts, all the view shafts were contained within it. So like, for example, if you had like the marae, you'd want to secure the views to the maunga, perhaps to significant past sites, and then also to the sea and to the river, if views, for example, were from there. But then you'd also want views from all of those areas to the marae and then to those parts, and that's secured as well. So I think that could potentially be difficult. So it would be probably would provide clarity to include that for view shafts of significance to tangata whenua, it would be useful to include the to, from, and between.
I can certainly understand the confusion if it's not clear, but if you've asked for it, and I will sort of get some feedback from the staff on this point, because the kōrero from Damon really resonated with me about how these places and views, particularly when you're on the elevated areas like Pukaka, looking out to other key areas, it's actually looking back to that key signal, that site as well was so much part of the landscape and the fabric and the history. So I can understand why he feels like that. So I just wanted to test the reason we haven't suggested some provisions is you just haven't worked out where perhaps they might be. But if there's if the staff have changed their minds in terms of listening to you, and I think there was a suggestion that they really wanted to listen to your evidence, Bellamy, Casey, and also Damon's given some interesting thoughts too. So we'll hear back from them. So listen, that's all we have for you, Casey. I think it is worth just having a pit stop. 10 minutes, grab a cup of tea, have a break, and we'll see everyone back about 10 to 4. Thank you. To go. So
that's all good.
Thank you. So for those who didn't hear, we've got a new hearing administrator, because Charles looks like he had to come out. So thanks for multitasking there, Ali.
Oh no, it's not me, Stephen. We've got Julie here. We've got
Julie's here. All right.
We've got the gold, the VIP. Oh, I was having FOMO.
Well, welcome, Julie. How you doing?
Good, thanks.
Yes. So look, I think we do have one last submitter to hear. So Te Kahui Taranaki Iwi Trust, Ms. Hokopara. Are you there, Maria? There you go.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you, commissioners, again for the opportunity to speak to you. I'm going to take my evidence as read, and I just want to reiterate some of the points that have been raised today. So Matua Damon's kōrero around the importance of view shafts and the to and from, the relationship between those sites and how they are, how important they are. And then I'd like to, tautoko Casey's kōrero about the importance of that to and from, and how the proposed changes would, the proposed amendments to Objective Views 01 would allow for the inclusion of those view shafts of significance to tangata whenua to be included at a later date. In terms of entrance corridors, also supporting the evidence of Damon Ritai with and Casey Bellamy's evidence as well around the importance of some of those roads and those entrances into New Plymouth. So for Te Kahu o Taranaki, the entranceway from the west, the western entrance corridor, it lies within the Taranaki iwi rohe, and as Matua Damon was talking about the importance of routes from other parts of Taranaki and north to the rest of New Zealand to Pariaka. So there's a lot. And then similarly, the creation of the state highway to Parihaka as part of the Crown's actions against Parihaka, and so there's quite a lot of significance and history that goes with those roads. And so I think entrance corridors are an important way to not necessarily to right the wrongs, but to acknowledge that the creation of these roads and the creation of these the state highways and things like that have a history and have connections with trauma, and that it's important to acknowledge and provide for ways for tangata whenua to reclaim or to have some involvement in welcoming people into the district, but also recognising the history that goes along with them. So I think, I think there's definitely place for tangata whenua values to be included in entrance corridors, and similarly with view shafts, I think there's a correlation there around how tangata whenua values and how the plan provides for those within these two chapters in particular. The two, I guess there's one, in each of the chapters, there's one kind of key piece of relief sought for each chapter. The first for view shafts is the to from, that relationship between view shafts and so the site where you're viewing it from and then the site that you're viewing, that relationship, providing for that within the objectives and policies. And then for entrance corridors is that consideration of tangata whenua values and relationships within either the rules as a matter of discretion, or within the effects standard as a matter of discretion. That's all I really have to say. But
Yeah,
happy for
you've picked up the two from and your suggested relief that Casey supported. And we heard from Matua Damon as well about sort of the reasons. So look, I've got a couple of questions on that if the other guys don't pick those up, which they're highly likely to. So we'll start with David again in terms of any questions, Maria.
Getting the hang of this unmute button. It's only taken me all day. Good afternoon, Maria.
Good afternoon.
Been a long day. I do have a question on the two from one, and I just wondered if you've had a chance to read the Appendix 1 to the Section 42A report, which is the track change version of changes that they're recommending.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. And if we accept that the word views rather than view shafts might be a better way of expressing that, but it says views of Mount Taranaki to sea, water bodies, etc., provide a strong sense of place and identity and have significance to Tana Whenua, are recognised and maintained.
Mm.
Would that preclude the council introducing a policy and methods at a later stage through a first scheduled process to give effect to that objective in relation to either important views that haven't been protected, or to provide the both from and to component to views that have been protected but only relate to the from at this point? So that's a very garbled question. I guess what I'm asking is, would that objective in its revised form actually preclude what you're asking for?
Potentially, no. I guess, so if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that views, the way it's worded, views of the Maunga seas, water bodies, landmarks, and landmarks that have significance would
Yes.
allow for the to and from.
Yeah, that's the goal. And the role of an objective is to state an outcome and a goal.
Yeah.
So that's the goal. How it's achieved is the function of the policies, firstly, to set up the how question, and then the method and rules deliver on the how question. So if that was the goal, recognising that for whatever reason, scope or the work hasn't been done yet, the how question and the nuanced how question are yet to be answered, would that suffice in the meantime? Would it give a basis for the council to go away, do the work in consultation and partnership with iwi, and then produce a plan change or variation that's tested in the public environment through the Schedule 1 process?
I think for views 01, if it wouldn't preclude, as it is in the 42A recommendations, I don't think it would preclude that. I think there would need to be additional policy or amended policy to be able to identify those views.
Yes, and that
significance.
And what would your understanding be for the forum for those policies? What process would they have to go through?
Yeah, so that'd have to be a Schedule 1.
Yes.
Plan change.
Okay. Good. Thank you for that. Look, you heard my questions to Casey regarding the matters of discretion for developments that infringe a building setback along an entrance corridor, and also the matters of discretion for being extended to trees. You don't seem to have added the trees one in your
no, Te Kahui's
no.
your Taranaki did not submit on trees.
Right, okay. I can't ask you a question on that then. Okay. But what about in relation to the outdoor storage and sites adjoining an entrance corridor. Where the activity, where compliance isn't received and it's restricted discretionary activity, your matter of discretion 4. I mean, what's the practical application of that matter of discretion on a minor infringement of a setback, a front road setback by, say, a new garage in a residential zone?
I guess my thoughts on that are that so council's goal with the entrance corridors is to create a welcoming, pleasant experience, and there are opportunities within that for tangata whenua to initiate storytelling and all of that. And I accept that some of this is more appropriately within the road reserve, the berm, etc. And that can happen through signs and and in different art, landscaping, all of that. But I guess the entrance corridors, as it applies to setbacks and outdoor storage, building, landscaping, all of that, I think that it's more about how does that contribute to that pleasantness or the amenity of the entrance corridor, or does it detract from it? And I think that's where if we being council, the district, if we're trying to make this these entrance corridors as a storytelling, welcoming experience, then the adjoining strips or setbacks need to be considered, and how are they contributing to that? Are they enhancing that, or are they detracting from it? So I think that's and it might seem excessive to say like, oh well, do you have to consider tangata whenua values if you're putting a garage closer than if it's going to be 2.5 meters instead of 3? Well, maybe not, but you need to consider it as a whole, like as part of the overall storytelling. Is that going to contribute to, or is that going to detract from, and how would that impact on the expression of tangata whenua values within that entrance corridor? I think the other point that Casey made, which around the design guides, was that so the council has released design guides for the residential zone subdivision and the city centre, I believe, but as you said, they haven't. There's no integration, or there hasn't been tangata whenua values incorporated in that. Similarly, there are only, so those design guides wouldn't cover all of the land impacted by entrance corridors. So we have industrial land that that wouldn't fall within either of those design guides. So does that, if we're relying on design guides to implement tangata whenua values as they apply to entrance corridors, then there's a gap,
because it doesn't reference tangata whenua values. That's because what if I said to you, we don't even get to design guides if there's compliance with the setback? I mean, let's say, I think the notified setback is 5 meters. The recommended alteration is 3 meters. May not be in all zones, but I'll stand corrected on that. So if you've got a complying structure within 3 meters of the road, you're a permitted activity. The design guidelines don't come into play.
Yes, correct.
And that's fact, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. I guess, and it's probably become apparent on this issue with my questioning, I understand the objective, main roads leading to and from the urban areas, to and from the New Plymouth Airport, are visually attractive and provide a welcoming, pleasant arrival experience. I can see how some of the policies identify those corridors, allow for art, including Poe and those sort of things. But the main intervention rule is the setback rule. And that on its own, particularly as it's not promoting above ground vegetation other than grassed lawn, except for a screening function of outdoor storage, and its own, I'm seeing it as a very blunt instrument to achieve that objective of pleasantness. I think Mr. Campbell or Mr. Matheson indicated that in some zones, like industrial zones or commercial zones, you might actually get car parking in that setback area. Stacked car parks, which could have an adverse effect on the amenity and pleasantness coming in, but that would be a complying situation potentially. There's no structure as such that is within the 3 meters, but there are items that might not contribute to the amenity of the area adjoining the entrance corridor. And so I've got the feeling that the objective is promising a lot, but the rules in terms of intervention isn't necessarily delivering on that expectation. I just wondered whether that was a view that you shared or you had a different view.
No, I'd agree with that summary, because I think, like Ms. Gibson said, it is, I think the way the chapter's been written is, I think she used the word light touch.
Yes,
that
yes.
The activities are governed by the underlying zone. So I guess, I mean, I like the objective. I like the goal. I'm not sure about how to, what the best way to go about achieving that is without having more, stricter kind of expectations and rules around it, whether that's appropriate.
Maybe we can take a lead from Damon's answer on that. And he said that in terms of the carrot and stick approach, and I'm putting words in his mouth, the carrot approach of doing works outside the private land on the road reserve is more positive and could actually be more effective in giving effect to that objective. And that's valid, isn't it? I mean, the methods to give a check to the effect to the objective don't have to all sit within the district plan. They can sit outside the district plan, and they can be a mixture of statutory and non-statutory financial incentives. There's more than one way to skin a cat in terms of the subjective, isn't there?
Yes, yep, I'd agree with that.
Okay, sorry, that became a statement rather than a question. Look, I'm going to leave it there. It's been a long day, and hand over to Antoine and Stephen.
Kia ora.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Antoine?
Hey, kia ora, Maria.
Kia ora.
You would have heard my questions on Ms. Bellamy just in regards to just really unpacking her understanding of from or to. And my understanding was that was really in speaking to Damon's corridor about the relationship between sites and that the spaces between those sites, which was slightly different to where you might have views or view shafts from public spaces like a road or other places that aren't necessarily a site of significance, looking out to the sea and seeing those as being different. Is that a view that you share, or did you have a different view?
No, I agree with that. Yep.
That's great. The next one, it follows on from question Commissioner McMahon talked about in terms of the effect of the matters of discretion. And I'm just wondering what you perceive might be your expectation of a process. So someone's triggered one of these rules. There's a an inquiry or an application is made, what does the consent officer do? Do they make maybe I'll leave it to you and just you fill in the gaps of what you perceive might happen from that point on.
Yeah, so I guess it would depend on the nature of the application. But I assume that
let's continue in the vein of a shed of some kind.
Yeah.
A building. It triggers one of these rules, and the consent officer is considering them.
So I guess it would be in the absence of any kind of council strategy or approach that involved tangata whenua in designing an approach, that strategy for that entrance corridor that they are adjoining, then if there were no such document or strategy, then it would be to contact iwi and say, so does this detract from the cultural values associated with the entrance corridor and the narratives around in the storytelling that tangata whenua have for that place? And I guess any feedback and commentary would go to council and the applicant in order to say, oh yes, it's very detrimental, and you need to screen it via landscaping, or because of the existing landscaping and fencing, there's no impacts or proposed fencing, landscaping, etc. And or if there were a design guide or strategy that kind of discussed or set out the approach for the entrance corridor, does that contribute to it? Does it have any effects on it? Does it positively contribute? Yeah.
Would you see that as that's a conversation rather than necessarily an assessment, a written report?
Yeah, I think so. Although I guess depending on the scale of the proposal, it may require more formal I guess record of the advice. But I imagine for example, in the residential zone, someone wanting to move their garage closer, I think that's a conversation, not a whole assessment, potentially.
Interesting, thank you. I suppose my questions is if we were of a mind to go down that track, is that an efficient and effective process to follow? And so it was just really going to test what your expectations might be of that, because these types of things are done in lots of different ways around the country. But it was just understanding what your expectation might be, and we'll get some comment back from the staff. Thank you.
If I can follow up on that, I guess there's like another option is around like iwi producing narratives themselves, or iwi and hapu saying this is the kind of storytelling that we want to have embedded in our entrance corridors, and lodging that with council so that when council do come to having applications for this, they can refer back to that and say, oh, these are the expectations of iwi in regards to entrance corridors. This is what this is how it can be mitigated. This is appropriate, this is not appropriate, all those types of things.
Yeah, that's certainly a very similar approach to what I'm used to in other districts. I'm thinking of Rotorua, Tauranga, Western Bay, places in the Waikato. but that's normally associated with gateway programs and that direct interface, quite specific places between the urban and rural environments or places of significance. That's quite a common thing approach used, but I'm unfamiliar with this linear type of approach across these quite long corridors. So hence the line of questioning. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Here we go. I'm unmuted. Thank you for just your thoughtful answers, Maria. These are quite tricky issues as planning, all these planning chapters have these issues. So it's great to just engage in some sort of dialogue with other planners. So that's great. I do have just a follow-up question, and if Casey's still there, I might just ask her, because I meant to ask her this question as well. So I'll start with you. When I was listening to Damon and just some of the questions, I think might have been Commissioner Coffin about the difference between a gateway to a place and a entrance corridor. So you were here this morning, I think, when Ms. Gibson outlined the extent of the corridors, entrance corridors. They're quite long. They come right up to the city centre. And really, we've sort of heard today, perhaps the importance, perhaps from Tangata Whenua, and I just get your views that perhaps marking key gateways or places, or just with I don't know, narrative, and I also listen with quite a lot of interest with Damon when he talks about the locations between the various iwi. So we're learning a lot about Taranaki iwi and the various maunga that everyone relates to. Yeah, so it's really the question about, could we achieve that same objective by really focusing on some key gateways rather than these very longish corridors? So just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I guess I can understand the appeal of the gateway approach in terms of key kind of transition points, or so for example, urban to rural to urban, or hapu and iwi boundaries. There might be a few conflicts or discussions to be had around where those boundaries are. And I guess because of Taranaki's settlement by tangata whenua groups, like the coast was very heavily, has been very heavily settled. So there's a lot of, there were heaps of pa, heaps of kāinga. And so, and if you were to go to a gateway, then maybe you'd also just end up with an entrance corridor kind of approach anyway, because of the, I guess, the settlement and the sites along that highway. I know, for example, that that hapu within Taranaki iwi have been talking about po as markers for their hapu along their hapu boundaries, and kind of signalling to visitors around, like, oh, you're welcome to Ngā Mahanga, welcome to Ngāti Tairi hapu boundaries, and then where does that go into Ngāti Te Whiti, and so I think there's definitely value in that, and I think potentially that gateway approach would focus some of the I guess effort on having particular locations of markers of where that transition is, and more of a welcome. I guess it might, narrow or focus that to a particular spot. Whether that achieves the intention of the council for what they are wanting in terms of, I guess, the openness, the amenity, and the experience that people have as they can go into urban areas.
Maybe two different things. Certainly for me personally, I think traveling as I often do in a car from the south, coming into the top end of past the race course and then the whole ocean opening out, that entranceway is special. It's feels great entering New Plymouth, and certainly from the western side where Taranaki we are, again, the whole feeling of coming into somewhere that was pretty amazing in terms of landscape and things, certainly feels the same. But Casey, did you have any thoughts on that if you're listening in? Sorry to flick back to you.
I would really total what Marty has said about it. I wouldn't have much more to add to that. I do think that I do see that there would be value in having the gateway approach, but I would also be concerned that it may encompass such an area that it's almost similar to the entrance corridor approach anyway.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you, Marty. I'll just leave it there. Again, appreciate you listening in and being involved, and certainly just for you and Casey and Sarah, the sort of the dimension that having someone from like Damon come in from a cultural values point of view to support the planning evidence is just adds so much to our hearing. So just pass on the thanks to him and the others that are involved. Thank you very much.
Kia ora.
Right, we're back to you, Lauren and Ali. So let's just get into it, shall we? And take us through where your thoughts are.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll start this time with my verbal right of reply. So just to recap the matters that remain in contention, the consideration of tangata whenua cultural values as a matter of discretion and rules and effect standards, and the minimum setback for structures on residential, commercial and mixed-use zone sites adjoining the entrance corridors. So while it's fresh in our minds, we'll turn to the consideration of tangata whenua cultural values. And I just want to give you context about the original submission and where we've landed today. So in its submission, Te Kotahitanga sought amendment to the matters of discretion in the rules and effects standards to provide discretion to consider effects on tangata whenua and their relationship with their culture and traditions. And Te Kahui supported this submission in a further submission. And in my section 42A report, I recommended rejection of these submissions based on that very limited geographic focus of the provisions, being the setback area. And, part of my rationale was that the recommended amendment to policy P5 would ensure that cultural values were taken into account for discretionary activities. So in her brief, Ms. Bellamy for Te Kotahitanga highlights a specific concern with that one standard, S1, the minimum setback from the road boundary for structures. And she recommends the inclusion of a matter of discretion. And in her brief of evidence, Ms. Whakapora for Te Kahui recommends that tangata whenua values be added to the matters of discretion for 3 rules, and you've talked those through with her. But alternatively, she supports the recommendation to amend effect standard S1 suggested in the evidence of Ms. Bellamy. Right, so we've heard from the submitters that entrance corridors have tangata whenua cultural values that contribute to a sense of place. And I acknowledge this, and in my view, the benefits of recognising and providing for these values are community-wide. They're not just limited to tangata whenua. And I too enjoyed hearing about the significant walking tracks from the kōrero of Mr. Ritai, and the idea of working collaboratively with the council to identify specific points along entrance corridors to assist with that cultural expression. Where I struggle a bit, and you've talked about this too, is that entrance corridors affect large stretches of roads and streets in the district, and I have reservations in requiring the engagement of tangata whenua for all consent applications to reduce the setback of a structure. You know, a landowner, as you say, wanting to build a dwelling closer to the road would need to engage with tangata whenua to demonstrate the extent to which the design, siting, external appearance of a structure recognises and provides for the relationship of tangata whenua and their cultural values and traditions with their ancestral lands, waters, sites, wahi tapu and other taonga, which is, it's a big ask. And I note the measure of discretion in effect standard S1 that relates to the design guides, and I agree with Ms. Bellamy's statement that the design guides have unfortunately not benefited from the input of tangata whenua expertise. I note that there's a separate hearing on the design guides, which is scheduled later in the hearings process. Now, while it's too early to detail the recommended amendments to those design guides, it is anticipated that they'll be reworked with the input of tangata whenua. And this may be the most efficient and effective way to deliver the desired outcomes of the submitters, at least in some of the zones. But I acknowledge that there would be gaps because the design guides don't cover all of the land that's impacted. Yeah, it's really tricky, and I'm afraid, other than my view about the design guides and having heard from the submitters today, particularly regarding the significance of the New Plymouth entrance corridors, the road reserve versus the adjoining private property, and the idea of iwi producing narratives, they're all ideas that I'd like to give further consideration to and to come back to you on in my written reply.
Thank you.
Okay, so turning then to Kāinga Ora's submission regarding setback of structures in the residential, commercial and mixed use zones. So in its submission, Kāinga Ora sought that those zones, aforementioned, be deleted from effect standard S1, which, as a reminder, is the minimum setback for structures. So this would mean that the minimum setback distance for a structure in any of those zones would be those detailed in the underlying zone chapter, whether or not the site enjoyed an entrance corridor. So in response to the submission, I recommended reducing that 5 metre setback requirement to 3 metres for sites in the residential, commercial and mixed use zones. And in his evidence, Mr. Campbell for Kāinga Ora considers that the amendments are a step in the right direction, but do not go far enough. And we've heard from Kāinga Ora today about that. However, now Kāinga Ora are recommending deletion of the western and southern entrance corridors for New Plymouth, where they front the residential, mixed use and commercial zones, and deleting the residential component of the northern entrance corridor. Now, in my view, this is beyond the scope of Kāinga Ora's original submission and their further submissions, and indeed any other submissions on the chapter. There are no submissions that request deleting portions of the entrance corridors for New Plymouth. The scope is limited to deleting reference to the residential, mixed use and commercial zones in that effects standard ECOR S1. So my reply is applying Kāinga Ora's arguments to that matter, to that standard setback. So following Mr. Campbell's evidence, I reconsidered the portion of the western and southern entrance corridors where they enter the city. So these are the commercial and mixed use zone sites near the city centre. And I largely agree with him and consider that the portion of Devon Street West that runs from Morley Street to Dawson Street on the western entrance corridor and Elliott Street from Lemon to Leach Street more characteristic of a city centre environment than an entrance to the city. In my view, as I said, I think there's an issue as to scope, and I don't think we can, or I don't believe that I can recommend deleting those portions of the entrance corridor, but I will be recommending exempting these areas from a requirement to comply with that effects standard S1. With regard to the residential zones, I stand by my position that a minimum 3 metre setback is appropriate for the residential zones that adjoin entrance corridors. I note that my recommendation for the 3 metre setback aligns with the underlying low density and general residential zone setbacks. And therefore it's really just the medium density residential zone that remains in contention, noting however that Kāinga Ora has other submissions on the setback for residential zones. So I know I sound like a stuck record here, but I disagree with Mr. Campbell that the difference between a 1.5 metre and 3 metre setback is too subtle to be appreciated by people travelling along entrance corridors. And this is particularly when combined with the minimum landscaping standards. So the cumulative effect of planting in a 3 metre setback strip has there's the potential to positively impact on that coherent visual amenity of an entrance corridor as it passes through the residential zones and into the city or town centres. Now, I talked at the outset of the hearing about a 3 metre strip allowing for a tree to be planted or trees, whereas a 1.5 metre strip wouldn't. And I appreciate that, that's not the standard, that's a standard greater than what's in the plan. But a 3 metre strip would still enable that if a landowner chose to plant a strip. And I note that the Auckland Design Manual for planting states that where the setback between the street and the building is 2.5 metres or more, that consideration should be made to provide at least one tree. So that's where I've taken, I'm not a landscape planner or a landscape architect, but that's where I've taken that position from, that a 3 metre strip would allow for a tree. Now, okay, about the residential fencing, and I respect Mr. Campbell's view that residential fencing would nullify the desired outcome of the setback. However, I have a different view, and I have outlined it in my 42A report. Just to recap, in the general residential zone, the permitted front fence height is 1.4 metres. It's not 1.8. However, where residential properties front a state highway, there is a greater permitted height, but where the fence is over 1.5 metres, it needs to be at least 50% visually open. So these fencing standards were introduced to avoid the scenario of high closed-bordered fences that have become popular, and to reintroduce a relationship between a residential property and the streetscape. So that's it. I think the setback is unlikely to be fully screened behind a high fence, and that it still and will contribute the landscaping rather will contribute to the entrance corridor amenity. And I think we've talked a lot about grass, but it's really important to note that it's not just about grass or other planting, it's also about space. It's about enough room for that built environment to breathe. And I think the context here is really important. In New Plymouth, intensive urban development isn't going to be akin to that of the metropolitan centres, where buildings up to the front boundary are commonplace. And in my view, modest provisions, such as the entrance corridor provisions, are even more important given that the future planned intensification. And just a final comment about the NPSUD and its tension. I agree, and my view hasn't shifted at all, that there's an undeniable priority argument for compact urban form and intensification. But I really don't think that this priority rules out provisions that deliver amenity outcomes. This chapter is not going to sink intensification in New Plymouth. I think that entrance corridors are a way of providing for local identity, for cultural identity, and amenity that will contribute to the well-functioning environments and urban environments in our district. Thank you.
Right, here we go. David, any questions from you? Thank you. I'll have to my my microphone on now.
Thank you, sir. No questions from me. I've taken quite a few notes, but I'll be very interested in the written response and the formal right of reply.
Okay, Commissioner Coffin.
Yeah, thank you for the response. I didn't have any questions.
Yes, I just had a follow-up query about your Erin Griffith.
Yes. Apologies, Commissioner Daish. You did too, and I have got some notes here. It's a shame really that Ms. Griffith isn't here, and we don't have the benefit of hearing her views on the options that I've set out in my Section 42A report. But if I just go over, let's step back a bit. So we've got a situation here where a summary of a submission was cut and pasted from another summary. So it's completely incorrect. It relates to a different standard, and there's no mention of the relief that was sought in the original submission. So I've outlined options to you. First being to retain the provision as notified, and as you say, just say, oh, we made an error there, and move on. Secondly, to re-notify the summary relating to that effect standard, and to go through the process again. And thirdly, to make a decision on the submission utilising clause 10 of Schedule 1. So that would be me perhaps making a recommendation to you on that submission, and you either accepting it or recommending to the council on it rather. It's complicated a little bit because I really think there is merit in the submission, and in my view it could result in a better standard for landscaping of setback strips. But I do think it would be imprudent to amend the effect standard relying on an incorrectly summarised submission point. And I do want to acknowledge here that several of the submitters on the chapter have generally opposing views to Ms. Griffith regarding the provision of setbacks and planting requirements. And it's not fanciful to conclude that they would have further submitted on the submission point had it been accurately notified. So in my view, the soundest approach would be to re-notify the submission point with a corrected summary for further submissions. And if the panel was of a mind to agree, it could issue an instruction, and re-notification could occur over forthcoming months and be considered potentially at the plan integration hearing.
Okay, I think, thanks for the clarification, because the fact that it wasn't a miss or a partial summary, it's a totally wrong summary. Has Ms. Griffith been in touch with you about this after reading your report, or has there been any dialogue at all?
Not with me directly, but I understand that Ms. Griffith is extremely overcommitted at the moment and wasn't able to attend to the matter.
Okay, but she is aware of the matter?
Is that correct? Yeah. Is she's aware of the?
I'm not sure whether she's aware of it.
Sorry, I don't know. But whether she
Okay.
is.
Look, I think David's got his hand up, so
It's
you
on
go,
a
David.
different- No, it's on a different matter, completely different matter, Stephen.
All right. So yeah, so the option of re-notifying is it's costly. It's yeah. So really, I think in your written right reply, if you can talk that around with Sarah and the team and just see whether that's the recommended approach, we wouldn't stand in the way if that's how you thought you should handle it. Is my sort of initial feedback. Whether the other commissioners have any just gut feel on that as well.
Yeah. Not too sure.
Not too sure.
I will seek some legal advice as part of that reply to you.
But there's clearly, in my mind, natural justice matters both ways. And if we said, oh well, bad luck, that concerns me. As does the fact that if we did act on it, it concerns me the other way. So we're caught. So I think just consider it in the round, and we'll certainly read your recommendations, Ali, and move from there.
Thank you.
So, David, do you want to go on your other question?
Yeah, yes. Sorry, Ms. Gibson. I was just refreshing my memory on the notes that I was frantically taking. And the point that I just scribbled down while you were talking, and I didn't really get to the guts of it, was in relation to the scope of the KO submission in relation to one matter. And I wasn't sure what that matter was, but I do recall that the chair asked Mr. Matheson about scope, and he gave a fairly bullish answer that he felt that all the matters were within scope. So my question to you is, have you taken any legal advice on that scope matter?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Would you be able to and record that in your right of reply?
Yes, I will. Yes.
And could you just remind me, so I've got a record of it, what it particularly related to?
Right. Well, in the evidence today, Kāinga Ora and in the briefs is requesting that parts of the corridors be deleted.
Okay.
And my reading of their submission was that the residential, commercial and mixed use zones be deleted from effect standard ECOR S1. So it's a very important, it's the crux of the chapter, but it is just one provision. The outcomes are different.
Okay. So you're saying that the deletion of that standard from those three zones would not equate to a modification of a particular corridor?
Yes, I'm saying that.
Because I've asked for 11, they've accepted 11, and of the remaining 7, it's a mixture of deletion and modification, isn't it? in their brief of evidence, at least.
Are you talking about
With the
entrance
view
corridors?
shafts.
Yes, entrance corridors. Oh, sorry, I'm getting mixed up with view shaft. Man, it's been a long day.
Yes.
You're absolutely right.
But
Okay.
yes, I'll be sure to have some legal advice with that.
Yes.
Reply.
Okay, because I'm not sure, Stephen, whether your question to Val Matheson was in relation to the corridors. It was more in relation to view shafts, wasn't it?
I think it was across the board, but
Across the board? Yes.
yeah.
It'd be important.
Few
Yeah,
shafts
be
at the time.
consideration if we did proceed to conferencing to define what the scope was.
Look, I think Michael's and Nick are listening in. So Michael, if you're listening in, maybe it's maybe you can talk to Val and come back to the hearing administrators just to check that the position of Kāinga Ora is that scope is available for both the relief you're seeking on entrance corridors and on view shafts.
Yes, Commissioner, we'll come back to you on that.
Yeah, and then we'll take it from there. If you could just do that promptly as you can, get into the system, that'd be good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, and sorry for the confusion, Ms. Gibson. As I said, it's been a long day. Easy to get view shafts and entrance corridors fixed up.
Yeah.
It was all from me. Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Ali. And look, I'd just like to say, we're really enjoying the quality of the reporting coming to us from the staff and the dialogue we're having. It's great. So thank you for all your assistance.
Thank you.
Right, Lauren, we're into view shafts.
Hey, view shafts. So what I propose to do is step through my verbal right of reply in this order. I will address Kāinga Ora first, and then I've got three components there. The specific view shafts, the greater accuracy in the identification of view shafts, and then the changes to the objective and policy. Then I propose to talk about two from in between, regulation of trees within view shafts, and then finally, any structure is appropriately located, which was raised by Southern Cross. So first up, Kāinga Ora. I wanted to acknowledge the level of work that's gone into the evidence. It was very comprehensive and it was really interesting to read. So thank you for that. I also wanted to acknowledge the move from their initial submission, which was deleting quite a lot of view shafts down to only a few in contention. So thank you for that. Mr. Bain and I, we met last week to go through the evidence. So first up, I'll deal with the ones regarding the view shafts oriented along roads to the sea. So that's full deletion of Belt Road view shaft and partial deletion of the Cutfield Road and the Glover Street view shafts. So I do not agree with this. BC views that they're a really strong characteristic of New Plymouth, and part of this characteristic is that the assessment points for the view shafts are at the top of steep hills, and these views continue for quite some time as you move down the hill. And these views of the sea help to orientate you and create a strong sense of place and identity, and they very much reinforce that you are within a coastal city. And I talked at the start of the day in my presentation about how New Plymouth used to turn its back to the sea and how a lot of infrastructure has been invested by the council in terms of embracing the coast. And at the moment, the visual connection between the city and the sea is evident to the community, and the proposed district plan seeks to enhance that even more through other provisions, such as the extension of the defined pedestrian frontage requirements. And I also referred to the fact that council's trying to enhance this even more through the city centre strategy that I touched on this morning. So I'm concerned that if these view shafts were removed from the plan, that future development could leave only very narrow viewpoints of the sea, and that would alter the relationship between the city and the sea. So no longer would the city and the sea blend together that almost become like distinct entities where people lose that reminder that they're in a coastal city. And in terms of modification sort of Cameron Street view shaft and then the full deletion sort of Victoria Road, I will talk about Cameron Street first. So Mr. Cameron considers that the Cameron Street view shaft is of limited amenity value beyond its ability to showcase the landform of Ngā Motu Sugarloaf Islands and that its extent should be modified. He considers that a more extensive view compromises potential building heights across the city centre while adding little in the way of amenity, and that people are unlikely to deliberately seek out a view as distinct from the more valuable and more important views from Pukaka, Muslin Hill and Churchill Heights. And then he considers that the Victoria Road view shaft should be entirely deleted for similar reasons. In his evidence, Mr. Ray states that view shafts are included in the plan to effectively manage identified important views from specific locations to ONLs and other landscape features and characteristics such as the sea and the city and the relationship of these elements which contribute to people's appreciation of the pleasantness, aesthetic coherence and cultural and recreational attributes in the place. He considers that the views are not of enough importance to warrant specific management. So I wish to clarify that there's no ranking system that places one view above another view in value just because it happens to contain focal elements such as the Ngā Motu Sugarloaf Islands, Mount Taranaki or the Windwand that other views do not. Similarly, it's not about identifying only those views that people deliberately seek out, such as Pukaka, Muslin Hill and Churchill Heights. What determines whether a view is included or not is the number of people that experience it on a daily basis and whether it reinforces our sense of place and identity. So at this stage, I do not agree with the modification of Cameron Street view shaft to make display smaller. The Ngā Motu Sugarloaf Islands are not the only focal element of the Cameron Street view shaft. It also includes the sea around them and the distinctive building lines set against the sea. When people travel down this road, it reinforces to them that they're in a coastal town. It also reinforces to them that they are in New Plymouth due to the presence of features that are not found in other coastal towns, such as those islands and then the roof of the Methodist Church, for example. Mr. Campbell commented that the footpaths on either side of the road are unlikely to be a place for people to deliberately seek out a view. As mentioned, the PDP does not list only those views that people deliberately seek out. This road is actually adjacent to New Plymouth Boys High School, which has a roll of well over 1,000 students. So many students walk down these footpaths on either side of Cameron Street every day, and many commuters also drive down Cameron Street to avoid the lights at the bottom of Elliott Street next to McDonald's. In regards to the Victoria Street view shaft, I'm not so firm on retaining this. I'd actually like to go back and have a look at this one with Mr. Bain. There has been some development in the foreground of this view shaft since the plan was notified, and I would like to see if this has impacted on the view shaft as well as take into account what the submitter has raised. Then we had the modification of Churchill Heights view shaft and the Pukaka Muslin Hill view shaft. So Mr. Campbell seeks that the underlying height is raised in the Churchill Heights view shaft and that the Pukaka Muslin Hill view shaft is modified to create separate displays rather than a panoramic extent. I would like some time to assess both of these view shafts given the evidence put forward. These view shafts are quite complex due to the number of sections involved and because they are panoramas, not displays. I acknowledge that a recommendation has not yet been made on the new height limits sought by Kāinga Ora for the commercial and the mixed use zones and for the residential zones because those section 42A reports have not been written yet. In regards to accuracy, there's several suggestions that have been made, so I'll step through them. First up was an origin point that is defined by survey. I support that. I think that would also be good to perhaps include a circle, a little arrow marked with 10 metres where appropriate to indicate that the assessment point is a moving assessment point within a 10-metre radius from the tip of the splay. Second point was a height above ground level at the identified origin location expressed as a reduced level. I support that. Sides of the view shaft confirmed with coordinates. I support that also. Final one was the definition of the floor of the view shaft. So the exact height of the view shaft floor can be calculated as it crosses any site on its path. Look, this is a little bit outside my area of expertise here, so I will be relying on Mr. Bain to help inform me on that one. I am a little bit concerned it could be adding some complexity and that we are trying to move away from complexity in the plan, but I'm open to definitely hearing more about that. And I don't think it would be the end of the world if it was included. So I did mention when I was talking earlier that I'm not quite sure how this is going to get into the plan. I'd have to check with our GIS officer and possibly Isovist, who are the platform provider for the plan. I don't know if we can even do it spatially on the maps, but at the least I think a document could be included, like a link from our schedule perhaps that has some mapping or tables or what have you. So I think we should be able to deal to that. In terms of word changes to the provisions, I support changing view shafts to views. That seems fine to me. I'm a little bit on the fence with using from identified locations and from the following locations. I'm not sure what value that will add at this stage, especially if we're going to improve the accuracy as I just discussed before, based on what Kāinga Ora have submitted. So with regard to using the word deleting the word maintain in views P2, I'd like some time to just consider this further, particularly as this wording is used consistently throughout the plan in the format that we use. However, I do note the use of the word maintenance in section 7 of the RMA, which requires the council to have particular regard to 7C, maintenance and enhancement of amenity values, and section 7F, maintenance and enhancement of the quality of the environment. So in terms of moving forward with the submission, I support conferencing, and I think we could come to some agreement on the methodology and also on what view shafts are included or not included. But obviously the outstanding matter here is the increased heights that Kāinga Ora are seeking, given that the zones haven't been reported on yet. Okay, next issue is the to and the from and the between. So view shafts have only ever been considered in one direction since the Operative District Plan was notified in 1998, and the proposed district plan has taken the same approach, in that view shafts have focal elements in one direction only. I do acknowledge that there are some view shafts that might be considered to have focal elements in both directions, and we've heard strongly today about Pukaka, Marsland Hill in particular. However, further work needs to be done to explore what the focal elements are coming back in the other direction or in the between directions. And council also needs to have a better understanding of how Iñuhatu want view shafts shown in the district plan. For example, it might not just be a case of to and from, it could be a case of between 2 or 3 or 4 points. In which case to and from is not going to be appropriate, and some alternative words might be better. So given that the work can't be undertaken within the proposed district plan process, I recommend that reference to and from be excluded from the policy at this stage. Okay, moving on to regulation of trees within view shafts. So Te Kotahitanga o Te Atiawa Trust seeks restriction of the height of new trees. And I note that Te Ruranga o Ngāti Mutanga seeks that it controls the height of trees, and they haven't actually specified whether it's new or existing. So I'm going to give my verbal right of reply based on new and existing, but it will have the same answer. So yeah, I do not think that council should be regulating the height of trees within view shafts. There's much bigger issues at play, and I've referred to some of those on page 18 of my report, such as trees helping to mitigate climate change, providing shade, providing food and shelter for wildlife. It has all been noise, sustaining native wildlife, and increasing amenity values in urban areas. I think that many people in the community will consider regulating the height of trees to be an encroachment of their private property rights. People can generally understand the need for a structure such as a house to be regulated because it is permanent or will likely exist for many decades, but trees are not considered permanent because they can have shorter lifespans and can succumb to ill health or disease. I consider it would be onerous for people to apply for a resource consent to plant a tree that may or may not grow over a certain height. And following on for this, I am concerned that the proposed district plan was notified without reference to regulating the height of trees and view shafts, and that the community has not had an opportunity to comment on this. I also want to share my experiences of dealing with amenity trees and notable trees during my time at council, and the problems that council has had with providing clear information to people and with monitoring. So the operative district plan used to recognise and regulate amenity trees. So these were trees that were located within a defined area in the city centre, and they were not scheduled in the plan. So essentially any tree over 6 metres or more in height was deemed to be an amenity tree. So amenity trees have since been removed from the operative district plan because of a change to the RMA that said that councils were no longer allowed to protect trees using blanket protection, and that any tree protected in a district plan must be scheduled. So when the operative district plan did identify amenity trees, it was very difficult for anyone, council and potential applicants included, to know what trees were deemed to be amenity trees because trees keep growing. Council did surveys to map amenity trees, but as soon as they were completed, they quickly became out of date. Often council had to send out an arborist to measure the height of a tree in order to advise whether a tree was an amenity tree or not. This created uncertainty, and council was unable to provide clear information in limbs and PIMs and for inquiries over the phone and at the front counter. So I'm concerned that the same uncertainty is likely to be experienced when people want to plant a tree and they have to determine whether it is in a view shaft or not. I consider it would be onerous for people to engage a landscape architect to help determine whether their property is within a view shaft or not, and or an arborist to help determine what species of tree might be appropriate if there was a height limit in place. If council regulates the height of trees and view shafts, this will place additional pressure on council's already stretched monitoring staff and budget. A recent example saw considerable time and budget spent on prosecuting a landowner that illegally trimmed a notable tree. In this instance, the tree was a notable tree that had met the grade to be scheduled as a notable tree in the plan, and I question the use of council resources to monitor trees that are planted within view shafts, and consider that council's resources are better spent monitoring trees that are notable. I'm also concerned that regulating the height of trees within view shafts will result in instances of people claiming to support a view shaft by removing trees in order to protect their view or resolve disputes with neighbours. I'm also concerned that it could lead to instances of undesirable trimming, which negatively affects the form and shape of a tree, especially when cut back on a horizontal plane. I did hear from Mr. Ritai today, who mentioned Pukaka Marsland Hill and trees blocking the view on the reserve. then I did hear from Mr. Campbell, who said that perhaps the issue is what is occurring on the open space area. So potentially the district plan is not the mechanism here. Potentially a reserve management plan could address this. And I'm pretty sure we would have some sort of reserve management plan in place for the likes of Pukakapa. So finally, this issue of is appropriately located that was raised by Southern Cross. So in my section 42A report, I recommended that this wording be retained. A view shaft, it's an overlay, and the PDP is an integrated document, so inevitably other matters in the PDP must be considered, such as whether the proposed activity is located in a zone where it is expected, whether it's affecting an archaeological site or site of significance to Māori, or whether it's works that are going to be carried out in a designation. So I maintain my position there that the policy is directive and provides adequate direction on what matters can be assessed. So I think at this stage I'm inclined to want to retain that wording. So that is the end of my verbal right of reply. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lauren. We'll go to David to see whether he has any questions.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. Very comprehensive, Mr. Byrne. Thank you for that. Just one matter, and I may have missed it, but did you comment on policy P2, views P2, and the relief sought from Kāinga Ora and the extension of that policy to include 2 sub-clauses?
I possibly should have made that a bit more explicit. So we don't consider that any views are ranked higher than another. So the follow-on would be is that we would not support that change there.
Okay, I did hear you say that, but I didn't realise it was in relation to P2. Okay, so you're happy with the simple 1-sentence statement of that policy as being effective?
Yes.
Thank you. That was all for me, Stephen.
Thank you, David. Antoine?
Yeah, just one question. Had you given any thought to, it was a Tangata suggestion, I think it was from Te Atiawa, in regards to potential plan changes in the future in regards to Tangata Whenua views or view shafts?
Yes, I think this is something that we could definitely consider in the future. Yes.
Cool. Thank you.
And look, one last matter I wanted to talk. Oh no, look, I want to take you to one of the rules. Just it's been something I've been thinking about throughout the whole plan. So, Ryan, you might be able to help me. Can we have a look at views R1?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just this. It's just the process and the wording around moving from permitted to discretionary or restricted discretionary.
Mm-hmm.
And those words which appear throughout the plan about matters over which discretion is restricted. Now I'll read them out. Those matters are the extent and effect of non-compliance with any relevant standard and any relevant matters of discretion and any infringed standard. So that's a bit of a mouthful. What I think you're saying is that if there's only one matter of discretion that's not met in terms of being a permitted activity, it's only that matter that is open for discretion, not all of the list of restricted discretions. Is that the intent?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah, I can seek clarification on that if you want, though, given that it's throughout the whole of the plan.
Yes, it is, and I'm pretty sure that that's the right approach, but just wanted to double check that wording. Sarah might come back to me, or just it's a sidebar to our main discussion. So I just wanted to get that in someone's mind. I think I understand what it's trying to achieve. Look, Lauren and Richard, one of the things that's become quite a feature of the hearing so far is there's a lot of listening going on by the staff team, and when there's good ideas put up by other professionals, planners and other experts, you really are thinking about how you might improve things. So that's really great. And I think it seems to me that there would be merit in having some further dialogue with Michael and Nick from Kaingaora about their suggestions and experiences with the Auckland plan, the more detailed ways of actually framing things so again, like what we've done with the previous hearing, Lauren, if you see merit in that, I think it's sort of, if you could coordinate that rather than us directing conferencing like that. We do encourage it, but that does bring into play the timeframes for reporting back for you. So it seems like you yourselves see real merit in that, and it might just be a Zoom type conference and you can talk things through and report on that. But we would want some sort of clear output from that could be included in your some notes for conferencing and what was agreed and disagreed and the reasons for, and then that could just be put in your right of reply. So just getting some feedback from you on that, whether that's doable.
Yes, I think that is.
Yep. And again, in terms of timeframes, would you need another week on your report back timing to facilitate that, or could you do it within the next 2 weeks?
I would love another week, please.
Yes. Okay. So let's just and Julie, if you're there, what's that date?
Thursday the 11th.
Okay. And Ali, I don't know whether you need some more time or you're not involved in any conferencing.
No, 2 weeks will be fine for me, thank you.
Okay. Look, that's really good. And I'd just like to close on that note that, as I said, it was very evident to us that the Kaingaora team and the iwi submitters, the planners helping them, have put a lot of thought and time into this. So we're very pleased with the way these hearings are going and the contributions, and certainly as I said before, the listening that's going on and taking on board good ideas. Because I have seen, as we probably have, actually council staff being pretty staunch, which is sort of an easy thing to do. But because there's always more work in actually accommodating and thinking about things from another perspective. So just want to say that. So look, with that, I think we will close the hearing unless there's any further comments or questions from anyone. And before we do close, we'd like to sign off with a karakia. Casey, you did a beautiful opening. Do you want to finish the day for us as well?
So someone else can, if
Well,
that's okay.
Maria, would you like to just finish us for the day?
Sure.
Yeah, great.
Unuhia, unuhia. Unuhia ki te uri tapu nui o tānei kia wātia, kia māma, te ngākau, te tinana, te wairua, I te ara takatū koe ara e rongo, wakeri ake ki runga. Kia wātia, ai rā, kua wātia, hau pai marire.
Pai marire.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. And I'll just close on a positive note for me. It's Hawke's Bay anniversary day tomorrow, so we've got a 4-day weekend coming up. So.
What's up with that? You got your own province now.
Hawke's Bay, yes. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Okay, see you everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.